Have you ever thought about how a country, one born out of this huge revolution, could double in size almost overnight, and then, just a few decades later, come this close to completely destroying itself? Well, that's the wild 75-year journey we're going to dive into today. We're talking explosive growth, a brutal civil war, and the incredibly difficult struggle to piece a nation back together again. So, how in the world did all this happen? Let's lay out our roadmap. We're going to break it down into 5 parts. We'll start with the nation's really ambitious beginnings, then move into the super divisive age of Andrew Jackson, then tackle the crisis over slavery that just wouldn't go away, the war itself, and finally, that messy, complicated attempt to rebuild. Okay, let's start at square one. The United States is young, it's hungry, and honestly, it's having a massive identity crisis. The big question on everyone's mind was, what kind of country are we actually building here? Not just for ourselves, but, in the eyes of the whole world. Man, the early 1800s were just a whirlwind. I mean, think about it. In 1803, Jefferson makes the Louisiana Purchase, a really bold move of presidential power. And poof, the country doubles in size, just like that. Then comes the War of 1812, which kind of forged this new unified American identity. And by 1823, the U.S. is feeling so confident it issues the Monroe Doctrine, basically telling Europe, hey, this whole hemisphere, it's our backyard now. Stay out. The nation was seriously flexing its muscles. But here's the crazy part, the paradox. While America was acting all tough on the world stage, it was absolutely terrified of what was happening at home. Even before all that expansion, the government passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. I mean, these laws basically made it a crime to criticize the government too harshly. And that right there tells you so much. This growing nation was deeply, deeply afraid of falling apart from the inside. And as we're about to see, that fear, it was spot on. So this internal tension really sets the stage for our next chapter, and for one of the most polarizing figures in all of American history, Andrew Jackson. You could say his presidency poured gasoline on all these smoldering fires, turning up the volume on both the nation's democratic dreams and its absolute worst contradictions. And this slide, this question, it gets right to the heart of it. Who was this guy? Was he a hero for the common folk, smashing the old-school elite? Or was he a tyrant, a king hiding in plain sight? Seriously, people were fighting over the answer back then, and historians are still fighting about it today. This really breaks down the two sides of Jackson perfectly. On one hand, he was the champion of the common man. He helped expand voting rights to all white men, and they loved him for it. He won in a total landslide. But on the other hand, his enemies saw him as King Andrew. He used his power so aggressively that they literally formed a whole new political party, the Whigs, just to try and stop him. And this tension just blew up during something called the Nullification Crisis. South Carolina basically announced it could just ignore a federal law it didn't like. Jackson's response? He saw it as treason. He threatened to march the army down there and enforce the law himself. This whole showdown was a huge moment for federal power. And honestly, you could call it the first dress rehearsal for the Civil War. But you can't talk about Jackson's vision for America without talking about its incredibly dark, tragic side. His America had no room for Native Americans. His policy of Indian removal led directly to the Trail of Tears, a forced death march where thousands of Cherokee men, women, and children died. It is a brutal, undeniable stain on the nation's history. Now, as fierce as those fights over tariffs and presidential power were, they were really just tremors before the earthquake. Because now we have to turn to the one issue that overshadowed everything else, the one problem that no amount of compromise could ever fix, the national crisis of slavery. For decades, politicians were just frantically trying to keep the country from falling apart. You had the Missouri Compromise, the deal that ended the Nullification Crisis, the Compromise of 1850. But let's be real, these were all just political band-aids. They were kicking the can down the road, buying a little more time. But they did absolutely nothing to heal the deep moral wound of slavery. They just let the infection get worse. But while all the politicians were busy making deals, a powerful moral movement was rising up. People who refused to compromise. Nat Turner's rebellion sent a shockwave of absolute terror through the South. And you had these courageous voices, William Lloyd Garrison, the brilliant Frederick Douglass, the powerful Sojourner Truth, and they were all demanding an end to the deals. They wanted immediate, total abolition. Just pause on this number for a second. 31.5 million people. That's how many souls, immigrant, native-born, free, and enslaved, made up this nation that was right on the very brink of tearing itself in two. And when that war finally did come, It was not going to be a fight between equals. Not even close. I mean, these numbers here, they tell the whole story. The North had way more people, way more factories to make guns and supplies, and just a massive network of railroads to move troops. The South was a fierce fighting force, for sure, but it was an agricultural society heading into an industrial war. That was a huge disadvantage.
And then, it happened. The breaking point. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was the final straw for the South. States started to secede, and the awesome, terrifying job of holding the Union together fell right onto his shoulders. To save the country, Lincoln basically did things no president had ever dared to do. He grew the army on his own and even suspended habeas corpus, which is a fundamental right that stops you from being thrown in jail forever without a trial. His argument was simple. To save the republic, sometimes you have to be willing to bend the rules. And then at Gettysburg, standing on a battlefield that had seen just unimaginable death, Lincoln completely reframed the whole point of the war. With these famous words, he elevated the conflict. It wasn't just about saving a map anymore. It was about proving to the entire world that a government of the people, by the people, for the people, could actually work, that it could survive. But this was his most revolutionary move of all. The Emancipation Proclamation was a total game changer, both morally and militarily. It changed everything about the war. All of a sudden, the Union Army wasn't just fighting to hold the country together, it was now an army of liberation. The war was now undeniably about freedom. So the war is won. The Union is preserved. Slavery is legally dead. But the next battle, and, in a lot of ways, the harder battle, was just getting started. What was freedom actually going to look like for 4 million newly freed African Americans? And for a moment, it looked like a second American Revolution was happening. I mean, in a stunningly short period of time, the Constitution was basically rewritten. You have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. They abolished slavery. They established citizenship for everyone born here, and they guarantee the right to vote regardless of race. This was a promise of a totally new America. But that promise was met with an immediate and incredibly vicious backlash. While federal groups like the Freedmen's Bureau were trying to help, Southern states rushed to pass something called Black Codes. And these laws had one goal: to recreate slavery in everything but name by controlling every single aspect of Black life and labor. And this backlash wasn't just happening in the state house. It was brutally violent. The Ku Klux Klan rose up as a terrorist organization, using murder and fear to stop Black Americans from voting or gaining any power. And at the same time, the economic promise of 40 acres and a mule, it never happened. It left millions of people trapped in this brutal cycle of poverty. And maybe no one captured the tragedy of this whole era better than the great scholar W.E.B. Du Bois. This quote just says it all so powerfully. It was a brief, shining moment of incredible progress and hope, followed by a violent, systematic push to drag the nation right back into the darkness. So what's the big takeaway here? The Civil War answered one huge question. The United States would be one nation, indivisible. But it left the most important question totally unanswered. What does it actually mean to be an equal citizen in that nation? And the failure to answer that question during Reconstruction, well, it didn't just set the stage for another century of struggle. It's a battle that in many ways we are still fighting today.